Previously in part 1, I was a shadow in my father's house, a girl born to be broken. After a vengeful fire turned my past to ashes, I rose as a weapon in the hands of the dangerous Princess Alexander. He trained me in the art of seduction, sending me into the arms of the emperor to serve as a deadly pawn. But a shocking truth awaits within the palace walls. My face is the ghost of the king's forbidden love. Now, trapped between an obsessive emperor and a prince with hidden motives, I must ask, am I the hunter or the prey? 3 days later, Consort Elena invited me to her palace for a chat. She excitedly told me that the master had determined the eldest daughter of the Zhang family was the most suitable candidate. I feigned surprise and said casually, I'd love to meet this Miss Zhang. It would be nice to congratulate her on her good fortune in advance. Without a second thought, Consort Elena agreed. That's easy. We'll just summon her to the palace, and you can stay and have dinner with me tonight. With that, she turned and ordered someone to summon Chloe Zhang. When Chloe Zhang was brought in, I was holding a cup of freshly brewed tea. At the sight of her, all the humiliation from my years in the Zhang manor came rushing back. I clenched my fists, then slowly relaxed them. She walked in with her head bowed, then knelt to greet us, not daring to look up the entire time. A far cry from the arrogant girl who used to torment me. Lift your head, I said lightly. The moment Chloe Zhang looked up and saw me, her eyes widened in shock and she nearly collapsed. Ignoring everyone else, she cried out in terror. Charlotte Zhang, what are you doing here? This is the noble consort, show some respect, Consort Elena chided, clearly afraid Chloe would displease me. She had been quite taken with her until this outburst. But it would have been a miracle if Chloe Zhang could remain calm. You may rise. After Chloe Zhang shakily got to her feet, I continued. I am not Charlotte Zhang. You must have mistaken me for someone else, Miss Zhang. Chloe Zhang glanced at Consort Elena, then at my attire. After a long hesitation, she finally changed her tune. You resemble a friend of mine. A friend? How ridiculous. Before I entered the palace, my status was humble. I never had the chance to know a young lady from a great house like you. Then I turned to Consort Elena. Since Miss Zhang and I seem to have such a connection, how about she joins me at my palace after dinner? I'll arrange an escort to take her home afterward. Chloe Zhang wanted to refuse but didn't dare. She could only press her lips into a thin line and agree. After dinner, Chloe Zhang and I walked beneath the high palace walls. She followed behind me, then suddenly stopped and asked, You are Charlotte Zhang, aren't you? How else could there be two people in the world with the exact same face and voice? I stopped too and turned to look at her but said nothing. Charlotte Zhang, you are Charlotte Zhang, Chloe Zhang cried out. Shouldn't you be more curious about why Consort Elena summoned you to the palace, Miss Zhang? I deflected coolly. It was you, wasn't it? It was you, it must have been you. My smile vanished. I took 2 steps forward to stand before her, my voice turning icy. Guess. Chloe Zhang flew into a rage and tried to slap me, but my guards stopped her. You dare strike the noble consort? Do you have a death wish? Her arms were pinned by the guards, leaving her completely immobile. She looked utterly ridiculous. Even now, Chloe Zhang still thought I was that lowly half-sister she could hit and curse whenever she pleased. How naive. She's not a noble consort. She's the bastard daughter from our Zhang manor, Charlotte Zhang. You've all been deceived by her. Charlotte Zhang, you little bitch, why aren't you dead yet? Chloe Zhang must have had a death wish, screaming like that in the imperial palace. It seemed I had really gotten under her skin. This is the imperial palace, not your Zhang manor, I leaned in and whispered. Don't do anything foolish, future consort of the 8th prince. Chloe Zhang stared at me in terror. What did you just call me, consort of the 8th prince? I whispered in her ear, why else do you think Consort Elena summoned you? Chloe Zhang staggered back 2 steps, looking at me in disbelief. I heard that after Chloe Zhang returned home, she took to her bed, refusing to eat or drink. She even wept and threatened to hang herself. When I heard the news, I laughed until tears streamed down my face. Cry, throw a fit. The real show hasn't even begun. The next day, I secretly contacted Alexander Pei and told him I needed to leave the palace. It was time to pay a visit to my dear father and Lady Zhang. Despite Alexander Pei's inexplicable anger the last time we met, My trip to the Zhang Manor had to be discreet. I still needed his help to arrange everything. Alexander Pei replied quickly. He agreed to my request but insisted on coming with me. So I asked the emperor for permission to leave the palace, using the excuse that I wanted to go to Pax Temple for the Moon Festival to pray and stay for a short while. Alexander Pei would arrange everything for my trip. We agreed to meet at the Welcome Inn on the day of the Moon Festival. Then, I went to the Zhang Manor alone. Wearing a veiled cloak, I walked down the long street, cut through an alley, and arrived at the gates of the Zhang Manor. Staring at the plaque bearing the name Zhang Manor, I was overcome with emotion. A year ago, I had fled in disgrace, secretly vowing that one day I would return. I just never thought that day would come so soon. The gatekeeper, seeing me linger for so long, eventually called for the steward. The steward asked me, "Miss, who are you looking for?" I lifted my veil and smiled. "Miss? Yes, I'm back." The steward looked troubled, unsure whether to let me in. After a moment's hesitation, he sent someone to inform my father. A short while later, my father appeared before me with Lady Zhang. They stood before me, their expressions a mixture of surprise and unfamiliarity. Lady Zhang, in particular, stared at me with eyes full of hatred, yet she seemed to be holding back for some reason. Chloe must have told them I had become a noble consort. Heh. They probably thought I had died long ago. They never expected the person they once trampled underfoot would now return, having soared to new heights. "I have returned. Aren't you happy to see me, Father Lady Zhang?" I asked deliberately. My father finally snapped out of it and looked me up and down. Because I didn't want to draw attention, I had come to the Zhang Manor in plain clothes and without any attendants. A suspicious look crossed my father's face. Are you really Charlotte? Chloe said you became a noble consort." Unwilling to waste another word, I presented the token the emperor had given me and got straight to the point. "I hear Consort Elena intends to ask the emperor to decree that my elder sister marry the 8th prince. I have a way to prevent that." When Lady Zhang saw the token in my hand, her face was still full of resentment and anger. But as soon as she heard there was a way to avoid marrying the frail and sickly 8th prince, she perked up. "Do you really have a way?" I gave her a bright smile. "If Father and Lady Zhang are willing to accept me back into the family, then I am still a Zhang. Naturally, I'll look out for the family's interests." Lady Zhang's demeanor instantly changed, showing me a tenderness I had never seen before. She took my hand, led me into the manor, and showered me with questions about my well-being. She asked where I had been for the past year, if I had suffered, and claimed that she and my father had worried and missed me every single day. What an act! Lady Zhang was a true actress, but I didn't care. I had my own calculations. I told Lady Zhang and Chloe Zhang that the 7th prince would be at the Welcome Inn on the day of the Moon Festival. I told them that Chloe should go there too and pretend to run into him. I would create an opportunity for them to be alone together. I made sure to emphasize the word alone. A place like the Welcome Inn, it's perfect for a bit of romance. I didn't need to spell out the rest. Chloe Zhang had always dreamed of marrying Alexander Pei. If she could latch on to the 7th prince now, she wouldn't have to worry about the 8th prince or consort Elena. Given their current situation, with just a little prodding from me, the mother-daughter duo would surely seize the chance. They'd arrange for something to happen between Chloe and Alexander, then have people discover them to force his hand. Drugging someone, then catching them in the act. Those were the tricks they excelled at. Back then, my mother. At the thought of my mother, I clenched my fists so tightly my nails dug into my palms. On the outside, however, I kept smiling. It would be too easy to have them killed, but I wouldn't let them off that lightly. I want everyone in the Zhang Manor to suffer a fate worse than death. Tormenting them with just consort Elena and the 8th prince? That's not nearly enough. The image of his deep, cold eyes appeared in my mind. I couldn't help but wonder what kind of torment awaited those who crossed him. Seeing my strange smile, Chloe Zhang watched me suspiciously. "Since when are you so familiar with the 7th prince?" I answered calmly. "The 7th prince is highly favored by the emperor and often visits the palace. If I weren't acquainted with him, how could I help my dear sister become the seventh prince's consort? Sure enough, at the mention of becoming the seventh prince's consort, Chloe and Lady Zhang lost all reason. They abandoned any thought of the hows and whys, completely swept up in the fantasy of a marriage into the seventh prince's manor. Watching their happy faces, the smile on my lips deepened. Snow began to fall on the night of the Mid-Autumn Lantern Festival. Growing up, I'd never had the chance to truly enjoy the festival, so I decided to leave early, without waiting for Chloe Zhang, who was still getting ready. The streets were bustling with activity. Scholars gathered in small groups, drinking and composing poetry. Young ladies strolled gracefully by. Laughter filled the air around the stalls selling candy figurines and lantern riddles. I found myself standing in front of a stall selling candied hawthorn, completely mesmerized. When I was a child, Lady Zhang ran the household. My mother and I barely had enough to eat, let alone afford candied hawthorn. Whenever I saw Chloe Zhang with more candied hawthorn than she could ever eat, I thought it was the most tempting food in the world. Then just once, my mother secretly traded one of her few precious pieces of jewelry for 2 sticks for me. She held me close and watched as I gobbled them down, my face a sticky mess of sugar. Her smile was so gentle. After that, I never had candied hawthorn again. But its sweet, sour, and sticky taste, along with my mother's smile, became etched in my memory, the definition of the most wonderful thing in the world. Want one? A lazy, bewitching voice drifted from behind me. Without even looking, I knew it was Alexander Pye. I nodded instinctively, then quickly shook my head. I'd left in such a hurry that I'd forgotten my purse. Wait here. Alexander saw right through me. He walked over to the stall, exchanged a few words with the vendor, and handed him a bag of silver. The vendor's eyes lit up as he opened the pouch, a grin he couldn't hide spreading across his face. After a series of bows and scrapes, he handed the entire straw pole, bristling with candied hawthorn sticks, to Alexander. My jaw dropped. Alexander took one stick and held it out to me. Just as I reached for it, he noticed my hands, red and raw from the cold. His gaze flickered for a moment. Then he unfastened his cloak and draped it over my shoulders. I froze. Since when had Alexander become so gentle? Here. Open your mouth. He held the candied hawthorn to my lips, his tone surprisingly tender. My eyes widened in disbelief. Was he going to feed me? Was he serious? Out here with so many people watching? Just as I was reeling from the shock, a figure flitted between us. "Seventh Prince," she cooed, her voice dripping with honey. "Chloe Zhang, at your service." Alexander frowned. The warmth in his eyes from a moment ago vanished, replaced by a sharp, piercing glare. His gaze shot past Chloe, landing on me with undisguised displeasure. What a coincidence. Ha ha. I gave him an awkward smile, stepped forward to snatch a stick of candied hawthorn from the pole he was holding, and then practically fled. Even though this was all part of my plan, that murderous look in Alexander's eyes sent a pang of guilt through me. Does he have any idea how terrifying he looks when he's angry? I furiously devoured the candied hawthorn, angry at myself for having been so spineless. When I reached the welcome inn, I asked for their finest private room and ordered a lavish spread of their best food and wine. After all, I thought, it's not like Alexander is short on money. The window of my private room overlooked the bustling night market. I gazed down at the brightly lit street, teeming with people. Unbidden, the image of Alexander draping his cloak over me, holding out the candied hawthorn, flashed through my mind. I didn't even realize a smile had spread across my face. A short while later, the waiter led Alexander and Chloe upstairs. When Alexander saw me, he still had that terrifying look in his eyes. I deliberately looked down to avoid his gaze, but he simply scoffed and sat down right next to me. Chloe, on the other hand, sat on Alexander's other side, beaming. She was practically boneless, leaning against him at every opportunity, but he subtly dodged her every time. Sk, sk. Such an unromantic prince. Seeing the cold expression on Alexander's face, I shook my head and turned my attention back to the food by the window, enjoying the moonlit view and waiting for the show to begin. Sure enough, a waiter soon brought over a plate of sweet rice cakes. These mooncakes with peanut filling are complimentary from the welcome inn. They symbolize reunion and happiness. Please enjoy. I glanced at the exquisite cakes, then at the street below. A cold smile touched my lips. I've been allergic to peanuts since I was a child, but Chloe adores them. At that same moment, I saw a familiar figure on the street below, hurrying toward the Zhang manor. I recognized her. It was Matron Chen, Lady Zhang's personal attendant. Seeing Chloe's impatient expression and the way she kept shooting me glances, I took the hint and prepared to make my exit. I just saw some interesting acrobats outside. I'm quite full now, so I think I'll go take a look. Chloe was overjoyed. In that case, sister, you go enjoy the festivities. I'll stay and keep the prince company. I smiled. Of course, sister. Well then, I'll take my leave. But as I made to stand, a large hand shot out from under the table and clamped down on my arm, holding me fast. I looked at Alexander. He was staring right back at me, his expression unreadable. Could it be? Had he figured it out already? After a few seconds of tense silence, Alexander's lazy smile returned. He looked at me and said, "These cakes look so exquisite. Aren't you going to try one?" The moment he said it, Chloe glanced at me nervously. My heart skipped a beat, but I kept my composure. "Ah no, thank you, I'm much too full." Alexander put on a look of regret. "Is that so? What a shame." Then he turned, picked up a cake and held it to Chloe's lips. "It looks like it's just you and me to enjoy this delicacy, Miss Zhang," he said with a disarming smile. His smile was utterly captivating. In an instant, Chloe was completely smitten, blushing to the tips of her ears. Chloe let out a coquettish little sigh and shyly took a bite, her face a picture of bliss and triumph. But that wasn't all. Alexander then took the cake and bit into the very spot her lips had just touched. At that, both Chloe and I just about lost our minds. She was giddy with excitement. I, on the other hand, was so shocked by his baffling behavior that my jaw nearly hit the floor. His change in attitude was too drastic. Just moments ago, he'd seemed completely uninterested in her. What was he doing? Watching them flirt right in front of me, as if I didn't exist, I felt a strange spark of anger. My original plan was for Chloe to get into Alexander's bed and blackmail him into marriage. Then I would present the evidence of her drugging him to Alexander and consort Alina. That way, the Zhang manor would not only offend consort Alina, but knowing Alexander's personality, he would torture Chloe and her mother to death for daring to manipulate him. But Alexander's actions just now made it clear he knew something was wrong with the cakes. Yet not only did he eat one, he started flirting with Chloe. Could it be? Was he genuinely attracted to her? At the thought, I stood frozen, biting my lips so hard I thought it might bleed, my eyes burning with fury. Chloe kept batting her eyelashes at Alexander while pouring him a glass of wine. I had clearly seen her tamper with that wine jug earlier. I wanted to warn him, but Alexander seemed to have forgotten I was even there. He had eyes only for Chloe. He smiled, took the glass, and drank it down in one go. "Miss Zhang is so much more interesting than some people," he remarked casually, toying with his cup. At that, the nameless fire in my heart flared. Was he calling me boring? They went back and forth, drinking several glasses. A huge, triumphant smile was plastered across Chloe's face. Slightly drunk, she leaned in and whispered smugly in my ear, "The seventh prince seems to really like me." Suppressing a strange, tight feeling in my chest, I gritted my teeth and replied, "Then you'd better put on a good show tonight, sister." Chloe's face turned an even deeper shade of crimson. Serves him right if he gets his virtue stolen tonight, I thought furiously. I didn't know why I was so angry. Seeing Alexander ignore me and smile so happily at Chloe not only infuriated me, it also left a sour taste in my mouth. But why sour? Was it because my plan was ruined? No, that didn't seem right. The more I thought about it, the more agitated I became. I stood up to leave, no longer caring what happened next. "Come, Miss Zhang, let's drink until we can't stand," I heard Alexander say from behind me. This time, he didn't stop me. Instead, he opened another jug of wine and filled Chloe's cup to the brim. Fine. It seemed I really was the third wheel. I pretended not to care and headed downstairs, but halfway down, I found I couldn't resist sneaking back to peek through the door. Alexander's attendant was standing by the door. I put a finger to my lips, warning him with my eyes to stay quiet. This attendant had been with Alexander for a long time. I knew him from my training at his manor. He gave me a knowing look and nodded. I didn't have time to explain. Through the crack in the door, I watched as Chloe, her face flushed, threw herself at Alexander. My prince, she purred, rubbing against his chest. Why don't we find somewhere quiet, where no one can disturb us, and keep drinking? A place where no one can disturb you? Humph. Why not just say you want to sleep with him? Alexander's eyes were hazy, as if he were drunk. He actually replied, all right. Damn it, I thought. The drug is starting to work. Damn it all. I was the one who set this trap. I knew Chloe and her mother would resort to drugs. But now, watching Alexander walk right into it, I couldn't stop the urge to rush in and drag him away from Chloe's groping hands. Alexander, in a daze, called his attendant in. Take Miss Zhang back to her manor, he ordered. Then he shot his attendant a look and added, emphasizing each word, and take good care of her. The attendant shot a quick glance toward my hiding spot, then smirked as he helped Chloe out the door. Only Alexander remained in the room. I lingered awkwardly by the entrance, unsure whether to go in or leave. I guessed that by her manor, he really meant his own, the seventh prince's manor. But if so, why was he still here? Suddenly, Alexander's deep, clear voice cut through the silence. You. Take me home. I jumped, turning to see he was pointing directly at where I was hiding. With no choice, I steeled myself and walked in. Just as I was about to invent an excuse for lurking outside, Alexander stood, swayed toward me, and collapsed right on top of me. You know, I regret it. He mumbled the words incoherently. Before I could even begin to wonder what he regretted, he went silent. I tried to push him off, but he was a dead weight. I had to call a waiter to help me get him into the carriage, then told the driver to head for the prince's manor. Sitting in the carriage, looking at Alexander's drunken state, I grew more and more indignant. Why, after he'd spent all that time flirting with Chloe, did I have to be the one to personally deliver him to his bridal chamber? Yes, with the way things were going, I could still get leverage on the Zhang family and provoke Consort Elena's resentment. But I still felt this tight knot of anger in my chest that just wouldn't go away. Hot. Alexander suddenly leaned in close, his hands fumbling clumsily at my face. I pushed his hands away, but he stubbornly reached for me again, pulling me into a tight hug and refusing to let go. Seeing him with his eyes closed and his brow furrowed, though, it was clear he wasn't fully conscious. It seemed the aphrodisiac was taking full effect. This was not the time for this. While struggling against his wandering hands, I tried to soothe him. My prince, just hold on a little longer. We're almost there. Chloe is waiting for you. I had really shot myself in the foot this time. Now I was just suffering in silence. Alexander opened his eyes and looked at me, confused. Chloe? Who's Chloe? He's still acting. Didn't you just have her sent to your room? I didn't even notice the sour, jealous tone in my own voice. A flicker of amusement lit Alexander's eyes. He moved even closer, our faces nearly touching. His hot breath, tinged with alcohol, washed over me. In the cramped carriage, I couldn't help but blush. You're jealous. His signature, cunning smile played on his lips. He looked pleased, triumphant even. For a second, I almost thought he wasn't drunk at all, just a sober old fox playing games. But the next moment, the carriage stopped at the manor gate, and he slumped over again, apparently passed out cold. I pushed him, slapped his face, and even dared to punch him once. Nothing, no reaction. And the flush and heat radiating from his face and neck were definitely symptoms of the aphrodisiac. I tried to drag him out of the carriage, but he was simply too heavy. After several failed attempts, I gave up. Besides, I thought, he'll have his beauty waiting for him by candlelight soon enough. It's none of my business. In a fit of pique, I left him in the carriage, told the driver to take him inside, and stormed off on my own. The next morning, just as I was imagining Chloe still entangled with the prince in his manor, a scream echoed from her quarters. Everyone in the Zhang manor rushed over to see what was wrong. They found Chloe and a male servant lying naked in her bed. The scream had come from the maid who'd come to attend to her. When I arrived, the door to her room was wide open, and a crowd had already gathered outside. Inside, Chloe was hysterically trying to hang herself. Get her down, quickly. Lady Zhang shrieked, on the verge of collapse. My father's face was contorted with rage. He strode over to the servant, who was kneeling and trembling on the floor, and kicked him square in the face. Then he turned to the onlookers. If a single word of what happened today gets out, he snarled, I'll make sure there's not even a corpse left to find. At his threat, The servants quickly dispersed. Chloe was brought down, sobbing hysterically. The scene was satisfying, but also genuinely surprising. Could it be that Alexander hadn't sent Chloe to his manor yesterday, but back here instead? And the servant who mysteriously appeared in her bed? Was that his doing as well? I gave Chloe a thoughtful look and quietly slipped away. I had just bribed a maid from the Jean manor and was about to secretly send her to the palace to report to consort Elena. When I learned the news of Chloe's disgrace had already spread like wildfire throughout the capital. The streets and alleys were buzzing with the story. The eldest daughter of the Zhang family had taken an aphrodisiac for a passionate tryst with a servant. I was stunned. Someone had anticipated my move and acted first, and that someone could only be Alexander Pei. In an instant, the Zhang family became the laughingstock of the capital. Consort Elena had just asked the emperor to arrange a marriage between Chloe and the 8th prince. Now, utterly humiliated, she felt personally insulted. In a fury, she had the Grand General find a pretext to accuse Lord Zhang of embezzlement in court, which led the emperor to shut down the family's businesses in the capital. When a wall is about to collapse, everyone gives it a push. My father's so-called noble friends, who used to call him brother, saw the Zhang family's downfall and swooped in for the kill. They not only cut off the family's finances, but also sent men to loot and vandalize the Zhang manor. My father was thrown in jail. The Zhang manor fell into ruin overnight. Lady Zhang, overwhelmed by rage and grief, died of a stroke. On the day I was to return to the palace, I made a special trip to see Chloe. She was huddled in a corner, staring at me with pure hatred. "It was you, wasn't it?" she spat. "You told me I could marry the 7th prince. You gave me hope, and then you pushed me into this abyss, into damnation. Are you satisfied now, seeing me like this?" I walked up to her, lifted her chin, and smiled. "You didn't want to marry the 8th prince, and now no one is forcing you to. Didn't I help you, just as we agreed?" Chloe lunged, her hands reaching for my throat, but I shoved her hard to the ground. I stood over her and sneered. "Chloe, do you know what you look like right now?" She looked up, glaring at me with venom. "You look like a dog," I told her. "A rabid homeless dog. And I am on my way back to the palace to continue being a royal consort." With that, I turned and walked out, leaving her hysterical screams behind me. Outside, I paused before the Zhang Manor's gates and stared at the plaque, now hanging crookedly from one hinge. I had waited every single day for this moment. But now that it was here, I didn't feel the triumph I'd expected. Instead, I felt a strange, hollow loneliness. Suppressing the melancholy, I turned to leave, only to see Alexander's carriage making its way through the crowd toward me. The carriage stopped in front of me. "Get in." I stood rooted to the spot, hesitating. That night at the Welcome Inn, I was the one who had schemed against him. It was clear now that he'd seen through it all and had just been playing along. He was probably here to settle the score. "Get in," Alexander repeated, his voice edged with impatience. I had no choice but to board the carriage. He sat with a dark expression on his face, not saying a word. I cautiously ventured. "My prince." Alexander glanced up at me. "You've certainly gotten bolder," he said coolly. I gave an awkward smile, pretending not to understand. I assumed he was here to punish me for setting him up with Chloe. But then again, seeing how ruthlessly he dealt with her, it didn't seem like he had any feelings for her at all. So why did he put on that whole act that night? Suddenly, the image of Alexander in the other carriage, whispering "you're jealous" right next to my ear, flashed through my mind. My heart skipped a beat. Could he have been angry that I brought Chloe along and then deliberately tried to make me jealous? I remembered that night in the carriage, how his body was burning hot, how he held me so tight, his scent a mix of alcohol and a pleasant, woody fragrance. My ears flushed red again, in spite of myself. I stole a glance at Alexander. He still looked grim and aloof. Sensing my gaze, his cool eyes met mine. They were distant, holding none of the fire from that night. I quickly looked down, flustered, and pushed the absurd thought away. "Alexander, how could he possibly?" "That night, why did you abandon me and run off?" a cold voice asked. "Huh." I was taken aback. I never expected him to call me to account for that. "I thought, when you had Chloe sent back to the manor, you meant your own manor," so I explained. So, you were perfectly fine with leaving me, drugged, in the hands of another woman? Alexander pressed, his voice sharp. I wasn't perfectly fine with it, I mumbled. Remembering the strange emotions I'd felt that night, a sudden wave of annoyance washed over me. What right did he have to question me like this? From the very beginning, our relationship had been one of mutual exploitation. He knew that better than anyone. If it was all about using each other, he had been fine with sending me to the Emperor, so why shouldn't I be fine leaving him with another woman? I suppressed the turmoil in my heart, feeling incredibly conflicted. Alexander, however, seemed to brighten at my mumbled reply. His expression softened considerably. He pondered for a moment, then said in a low voice, Your revenge is complete. If, and I'm just saying if, there were a way to get you out of the palace, would you be willing to leave? He looked up at me as he finished. I couldn't be sure if it was my imagination, but for a second, I thought I saw a glimmer of hope in his eyes, tinged with sorrow. Alexander's question left me stunned. To be honest, I had never really thought about what I would do after destroying the Zhang family. I knew the Emperor's favor was a fragile illusion, something that could be taken away at any moment. Now that my revenge was complete, wealth and status no longer held the same appeal. But if I left the palace, what would become of all Alexander's plans? Wouldn't all his efforts be for nothing? I remained silent, and the light in Alexander's eyes dimmed again. On the way back to the palace, we didn't exchange another word. After returning to the palace, I secretly made my way to Lady Yun's pavilion, and there I discovered a shocking truth. Both the Emperor and Alexander had said that I strongly resembled Lady Yunona, but it wasn't until I saw her portrait that I truly understood. The woman in the painting was the spitting image of my mother, and beside the portrait, inscribed in a love poem in small, elegant script, was my mother's childhood nickname, Winnie. So, my mother was Lady Yunona. The woman the Emperor had never been able to forget was my own mother. She hadn't been executed by the Empress Dowager all those years ago. She had been sold to a brothel. I sank into a chair, completely overwhelmed. Suddenly, a horrifying thought struck me. Did Alexander know? Did he know my mother was Lady Yunona? I fled Lady Yun's pavilion, stumbling back to my chambers in a daze. Just as I was wondering how I could possibly face the Emperor now, the Empress Dowager summoned me for a secret meeting. The Empress Dowager sat on her high throne, looking down on me. From a lowly dancer, you transformed into an imperial consort. Do you know why I never stopped you? Kneeling on the floor, I lowered my head and replied, I do not know, Empress Dowager. Because the Emperor fancies you. To be favored by the Emperor is a blessing I have earned over 3 lifetimes. The Empress Dowager's commanding voice boomed again in the vast hall. But I never imagined the Emperor would start neglecting the other consorts for your sake. This does not serve the Empire, and I can no longer tolerate you. Heh, what a convenient reason. Hearing her say this, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. Since she had laid her cards on the table, I no longer needed to pretend to be a timid, obedient girl. I looked up, meeting her gaze directly, and answered without a trace of humility or arrogance. If you wish to punish me, you'll have to ask if the Emperor agrees. Do you really want to repeat the mistake of the past and have another falling out with the Emperor? Years ago, the Empress Dowager had forcefully broken up a pair of lovers. Although the Emperor eventually compromised, he still held a grudge against her. It had been a point of contention between them for years. Seeing me suddenly defy her and bring up the past, the Empress Dowager stared at me with surprise. She snorted, her voice dripping with disdain. Do I even need to deal with you myself? Do you think the Emperor would protect you if he knew that you left the palace under the pretext of praying for blessings, only to have a private rendezvous with the 7th prince? My heart pounded in alarm. The Empress Dowager had planted a spy among my people as well. It seemed she had been preparing for this for a long time. I maintained a calm expression and said, The Emperor has always been a filial son. He'll believe whatever you tell him. The Empress Dowager gave a cold smile and called for 2 guards. First, 20 strikes with the heavy board. Then, gift the imperial consort a cup of the peach blossom wine I brewed myself. It appeared that today the Empress Dowager was determined to see me die here. With the Empress Dowager's command, the guards dared not disobey. They tied me to a chair, raised the heavy boards, and began to strike me. I don't know where I found the strength, but I clamped my mouth shut, trying my best not to make a sound. If it weren't for the Empress Dowager, my mother would never have been sold to a brothel, and she would never have been taken by my father and brought into the Zhang Manor. The Empress Dowager was the architect of her tragic life. Biting down hard, I thought to myself, if there is a next life, I will come back as a ghost and I will never let the Empress Dowager go. The heavy boards struck me again and again. It felt as if my internal organs were being shattered. The Empress Dowager stood on the high steps, watching coldly as I was beaten to a bloody pulp, as though she were merely enjoying a play. As the 20th strike landed, my consciousness began to fade. Just before I blacked out, I thought I saw a familiar figure rush in, kick a guard away, and lift me into his arms. That person, he looked so much like Alexander Pye. Alexander Pye. I couldn't help but laugh bitterly. To think that at the moment of my death, the person I wanted to see most was him. It was as if I'd had a dream where Alexander Pye charged into the palace and rescued me. I don't know how long I was unconscious, but when I awoke, I was truly lying in his arms. My whole body ached so much I couldn't move. Alexander Pye was holding me carefully, while several maids beside me applied medicine to my wounds. Was the dream real? Seeing me awake, Alexander Pye's eyes filled with a joy I had never seen in him before. How did I get here? I tried hard to recall what happened before I lost consciousness, but only blurry images came to mind. How did Alexander Pye get into the palace? If he really did save me, wouldn't he have offended both the Empress Dowager and the Emperor? Alexander Pye saw my concern. He dismissed the servants from the room, took my hand, and said softly, "Just rest. Leave everything else to me." His tone was gentle, filled with an indulgent fondness. In that instant, it felt as though something had struck the softest part of my heart. A warmth spread through me. I looked into his eyes and asked, "Why did you save me?" This was never part of his plan. Saving me at such great risk brought him no benefit. Alexander Pye stared at me, seeming to struggle for words. Finally, he sighed in resignation. "Do you truly not understand, or are you pretending not to?" The moment I opened my mouth, Alexander Pye's lips were on mine. Burning, yet soft, my eyes flew wide open. My brain, the only part of me that could still move, seemed to have stopped working. Alexander Pye covered my eyes with one hand and supported my head with the other. He went from a light kiss to a gentle bite on my lip, and then to a deeper exploration. He advanced slowly, unhurriedly, and I felt the world spin around me, my own will slowly dissolving. After a long time, just as I was about to lose myself completely, he finally let me go. I covered my slightly swollen lips, too shy to look at him, but Alexander Pye just grinned mischievously, lifted my chin, and asked, "Now do you understand why?" At that moment, it felt like 1,000 deer were stamping in my chest. My heart was beating so fast I could barely breathe. In the instant our lips had touched, I finally had to admit it to myself. Without me even realizing it, Alexander Pye had already claimed the most important place in my heart. He was the pillar of support I had yearned for deep down. But this realization was so sudden, I couldn't quite bring myself to accept it. Alexander Pye looked straight into my eyes and said, word by word, "The biggest regret of my life is sending you to the Emperor's side." Alexander told me that when he heard I had been taken by the Empress Dowager and had not returned, he sensed something was wrong. He immediately led his men and forced his way into her palace. In the end, he had to trade some of his spies and secret forces within the palace to get me back. He promised the Empress Dowager that he would never let me appear in the harem again. "You've been in a coma for 3 days. The Emperor has been searching for you everywhere and has fallen ill with worry. Yesterday, the Empress Dowager announced to the world that the imperial consort has died of illness." When he mentioned the Emperor, Alexander's voice paused unnaturally. I let out a quiet laugh and teased him. "Oh, it seems the Emperor truly does have deep feelings for me." As expected, Alexander's face darkened. He held me tighter, frowning in displeasure. "Then you can forget about ever going back to being his imperial consort." This man is so domineering, I thought. To think he was the one who specially trained me and sent me into the palace to win the Emperor's favor. and now he was the one getting angry about it. But seeing him jealous like this was actually rather cute. I smiled inwardly and decided not to tease him anymore. I told him everything, that the Emperor had never touched me and that Lady Unona was my mother. Finally, I said to Alexander, I want to avenge my mother. When I told him that Lady Unona was my mother, Alexander fell silent for a moment. He knew how tragically my mother's life had ended. He told me that his own mother, an imperial consort, had also been framed and killed by the Empress Dowager, all so her own son could ascend the throne. I was stunned. I had never heard Alexander speak of his mother before. Though he spoke of it now with a calm demeanor, I could imagine the hardship and pain he must have endured. Losing his mother at a young age, he had been suppressed by the Empress Dowager, yet he had still managed to build up his power to what it was today. His suffering was likely far greater than my own. Do you know what the Empress Dowager cares about most? He suddenly asked me. I thought for a moment and answered, power, status, and the Emperor. Exactly. The ultimate punishment isn't death, but the destruction of what they hold most dear. To deal with the Empress Dowager, we must use what she treasures most and crush her completely. Alexander looked at me, his deep eyes glittering with a sharp light. I suddenly understood what he meant. I gave him a radiant smile and said, I will appear before the Emperor and the Empress Dowager again. But this time, it will be as the wife of the 7th prince. A look of admiration crossed Alexander's face. With a triumphant smile, he wrapped his arms around me. You agreed to be my princess on your own. You're not allowed to take it back. My eyes darted playfully. I mimicked the way he had once acted, leaning close to his ear and whispering, Then, here's to a pleasant collaboration. The result was that Alexander Pei froze for a moment, then spent the entire night showing me, through his actions, the price of teasing him. When Alexander Pei and I appeared together at the palace's New Year banquet, the faces of the Emperor and the Empress Dowager turned deathly pale. The court officials didn't dare to breathe, only stealing glances at the Emperor, then at Alexander and me. I stared at the Empress Dowager, my smile bewitching, like a gorgeous rose blooming in the wind. The Empress Dowager had never imagined that after Alexander promised her I would never appear in the harem again, he would have me reappear so brazenly before the entire court as the wife of the 7th prince. She glared at me, her eyes filled with murderous intent. The Emperor looked at me and asked, stunned, You're not dead, are you? His voice was laced with sorrow, and I couldn't tell if he was asking me or the woman who lived in his heart. I answered slowly, I am not. I was so good to you. Why? Because of my mother. I took 2 steps forward and said, word by word, my mother was Lady Unona. What did you say? The Emperor's eyes widened. Hearing this, the Empress Dowager also stared at me in utter shock, a fierce light glinting in her sharp eyes. I guessed she ached with regret. Had she known, she would never have made a deal with Alexander Pei. She would have killed me outright. What a pity. Before the entire court, I walked step by step toward the Emperor and told him the secret of the past. My mother didn't die back then. She was sold to a brothel. Later, she married into the Zhang manor and gave birth to me. She's still alive? I took a deep breath as tears began to stream down my face. No, she's dead. When I was 9, her body was thrown into the boneyard, and her tragic life came to an end. The Emperor's fists clenched, his body trembling slightly, his face a mask of agony. The Empress Dowager tried to send her men to stop me from speaking, but the Emperor forbade it. The Emperor commanded coldly, no one is to touch her. I shot the Empress Dowager a cold smile and said, the architect of all this is our esteemed Empress Dowager. She tried to kill my mother then, and now she wants to kill me. Tell me, Emperor, what choice did I have but to flee the palace? The court officials erupted in an uproar. The Emperor remained silent, his face terrifyingly grim. I poured myself a cup of wine and raised it in the Empress Dowager's direction in a silent toast. The Empress Dowager trembled with rage. Losing all composure, she pointed at me and shrieked, "Guards! Drag this woman, who spouts such bewitching lies, away and execute her." The moment the guards moved, Alexander Pei stepped in front of me. His icy gaze swept over them, and they all retreated a step in fear. Enough! With a roar of fury, the Emperor flipped the table laden with fine food and wine. The hall fell instantly silent. No one dared to move. The emperor looked at me with immense sorrow, as if seeing through me to the person he had yearned for all these years. He gave a bitter, self-mocking laugh and murmured, "It was me. It was I who destroyed her." Then the emperor issued a decree. From now on, no matter the time or place, if anyone dared to harm me in the slightest, it would be treated as an act of regicide. I suppose this was his way of making amends to my mother. It was also his way of soothing the emptiness that had haunted his heart for so many years. Shortly after the palace banquet, the emperor passed away. In his will, he named the seventh prince, Alexander Pei, as his successor. The Empress Dowager was devastated. Overwhelmed by grief, her mind clouded over, and she spent her days in a daze, her behavior growing increasingly erratic. Before Alexander Pei's enthronement, he and I sat across from each other in a pavilion, playing chess. Beside us were platters laden with every kind of candied hawthorn skewer. I never imagined he would bring a candy maker right to the manor, just to craft all sorts of strange and wonderful candied hawthorns for me every day, exactly how I like them. I offered Alexander Pei a skewer and told him to try it, but he refused, declaring it was a treat for girls. "But it's so sweet," I muttered, thinking he didn't know what he was missing, and took a big bite myself. The candy had barely passed my lips, however, when Alexander Pei stood, leaned in, and snatched it right from my mouth. He leaned forward and licked my lips, his tongue catching a speck of sugar at the corner of my mouth. He murmured, satisfied. "You were right, it is very sweet."